Snow arrived without asking permission, sweeping the industrial edge of town until roofs turned white and alleys vanished. Thomas, a homeless man with a quiet way of moving, guided his dog, Ranger, through drifts that reached his shins. He knew every loading dock and steam grate by heart, but even the friendliest vents had surrendered to ice. "Easy, boy," he said, cupping Ranger's muzzle and rubbing warmth into it. When the wind screamed again, Thomas angled toward a forgotten warehouse with boarded windows and a rusted door. The lock had been broken for years. "Home for the night," he murmured. Inside, the air smelled of cut steel and old rain. The vast room was a cathedral of shadows, silent forklifts, sleeping pallets, a maze of dust brightened by snow sneaking through cracks. Thomas checked corners out of habit, then chose a sheltered bay against a concrete wall. Ranger circled twice and sat, watching. From his pack, Thomas pulled a dented pot, a knit cap, a pocket Bible, and a small bundle of kindling wrapped in plastic. One fire, small and clean, he promised the shadows. He stacked the sticks like prayer bones and coaxed the flame with his last match. Orange light licked the metal ribs overhead, stitching warmth into the cold silence. Thomas warmed his hands and held them over Ranger's paws, sharing heat the way friends share news. He broke half a heel of bread, softened it in water, and let Ranger finish first. Outside, the storm rearranged the world. Inside, the little circle of fire made a room within the room. Thomas leaned against the wall and listened. Snow carries sound strangely, like voices from another dream, somewhere far off. A motor droned, then two, then six. He frowned. Engines don't sing like that without a choir. The choir grew, deep and layered. A rolling thunder of pistons straining against ice. Headlights smeared across the slats of the boarded windows, then vanished again in the whiteout. Ranger stood, ears forward, a low rumble in his chest. "Yeah, I hear it," Thomas said, surprising himself with steadiness. He cupped the fire and pinched it smaller, reducing their beacon to an ember. Tires slushed in the loading yard. Doors slammed. Voices cut the wind loud, laughing, shivering. The warehouse air changed, filled with the restless animal of strangers. Thomas kept one hand on Ranger's collar and waited for introductions. Boots pounded near the loading dock. Then the rusted door yawned and threw snow onto concrete. The first man through was huge and bearded, ice crystals clinging to his eyebrows. His leather vest flashed an arch of red and white letters Thomas knew by reputation more than experience. Hell's Angels. Behind him came others 10, maybe 15 faces windburned, eyes bright with survival. "Anyone home?" the big man called, voice friendly but assessing. Thomas showed both palms, almost smiling. "Only squatters," he said. "The rent's kind, the heat is shy." Laughter eased something tense. Ranger's tail tapped once, warning downgraded to careful curiosity. They entered like a weather front, carrying an atmosphere of road and risk. Snow steamed from their jackets. Breath smoked in the drafty dark. "I'm Bishop," the big one said, clapping coal from his hands. "We got turned around. You mind if we ride the storm in here?" Thomas gestured toward the emptiness with mock grandeur. "It's a generous palace. You're welcome to the ballroom." Bishop's screen cracked open, flashing relief. "Appreciate it, brother." A younger rider shivered violently, teeth chattering like a bad starter. Thomas nodded toward a coil of pallet wrap and a stack of cardboard. "We can fix that." Soon the place sounded like camp instead of cavern. The scratch of knives, the creak of leather, the sigh of thawing hands. Thomas kept the ember alive, rationing heat like truth. He fed the fire's mouth with patience, careful to keep smoke thin. "No sprinklers," he warned. "But no point daring fate." Bishop knelt beside him. "You know your way around code," he said. Thomas shrugged. "It knows its way around me." Ranger drifted between men, collecting cautious pets, selecting favorites with democratic wisdom. Even hard eyes softened at a dog, choosing them. Storm or no storm, that's gospel. Food appeared the way road magic often does. A grease-stained bag of jerky, a jar of peanut butter, a sleeve of crackers sealed with luck. Thomas laid his last 2 tea bags in the pot like a tithe and boiled water over the tame flame. House blend, he said, deadpan. Laughter flickered again, warmer this time. They passed cups around, clinked ceramic and metal with reverence. The youngest rider, the one who's shaken hardest, finally stopped shivering. He lifted his cup toward Thomas in a small toast. To shelter, he said. To strangers, Thomas added. Bishop nodded. To both. Stories unfurled with disdain. A writer named Pockets had 3 kids learning to read the sky. A woman called Wren could fix a carburetor blindfolded and recite Dylan Thomas while doing it. Bishop kept the conversation low, careful, like a man carrying soup. When someone tried to turn loud, he softened them with a glance. Thomas listened more than he spoke, chipping in only when silence asked. He admitted to odd jobs, mistakes with long shadows, a wife who preferred peace to promises. Ranger's hat found his knee, gravity choosing his favorite anchor. We're all between storms, Bishop said quietly. After an hour, the warehouse felt less like a hiding place and more like a truce. One rider discovered a box of shrink-wrapped blankets and whooped like a kid. Another found a broom and, to everyone's mockery, started sweeping their corner into respectability. Bishop watched Thomas manage the small fire with priestly care. You're good at making little into enough, he observed. Thomas smiled without teeth. Practice. Bishop unfolded a knife and sliced his jerky to share evenly. You ever ride? He asked. Not since a different life, Thomas said. Used to think the road made men honest. Maybe it still does. Wind tested the doors again, shouldering them like a bully, finding the limits of kindness. Snow filtered through the cracks in glittering dust. The fire whispered, content to be small. You got a dog with a soldier's eyes, Wren said, scratching Ranger's chest. He know how to choose people, Thomas nodded. He chose me when nobody else did. The writers understood that sentence without translation. Bishop stood, stretching the chill from his back. We're bedding down, he announced. 4-hour watches. We keep the place tidy, keep the noise lower than the wind. He looked at Thomas. You want first watch together? The 2 men walked the cold perimeter, boot soles scuffing frost from concrete. Their breath made twin clouds that rose and vanished. Bishop spoke softly, conversation kept where Ranger's ears could hear. We get our names shouted louder than our deeds, he said. Some of that we deserve. Some belongs to men who like stories better than facts. Thomas nodded. Stories always eat the facts first. Bishop smiled at that, small and surprised. You are not what I expected to find on a night like this. Thomas looked out at the white world and shrugged. Neither are you. Near midnight, the wind changed pitch, a high thread woven through the drumbeat. Thomas listened, frowning. Drifts building against the north dock, he said. Could trap the bikes by morning. Bishop swore softly. We'll dig trenches before dawn. Thomas thought of exhaust clogged by snow, engines choked awake. I've got a better idea, he said. We'll park them inside, single file, like horses in a stable. Bishop's grin returned, fierce and boyish. You just earned a new patch labeled Wrangler. They opened the big doors carefully, ushered the bikes in one by one, chrome ghosts entering a midnight church. The machines lined up obediently, steam rising from their throats like prayer. Men slapped tanks as if calming nervous animals. Wren checked chains, tightening, oiling, humming some reckless hymn. Ranger trotted beside Thomas, inspecting. When the last bike settled, Bishop exhaled. You ever corral $60,000 of stubborn in 20 seconds? He asked. Thomas chuckled. I've corralled worse. He tapped the fire awake enough to brew one more pot. The warehouse felt warmer simply because the bikes had stopped being targets. Sleep, he told Ranger. We'll greet tomorrow standing up. Ranger arranged himself against Thomas's boots with a sigh. Night thinned slowly, like ink diluted to gray. Between watches, Thomas dozed in honest slices, waking to the soft murmur of men who trusted the dark a little more than before. He dreamed of roads not taken and roads that took him anyway. He dreamed of a kitchen with yellow light, a woman laughing at something he'd meant to be serious, a child's drawing taped to a fridge. The dream hurt the way healed bones sometimes ache in weather. He let it hurt. Ranger twitched beside him, chasing whatever dogs chasing sleep. Rabbits, perhaps, or the sound of belonging. Just before dawn, the storm finally admitted it was only weather. The wind eased, and snow turned from accusation to apology. Thomas stood stretching and went outside with a shovel he found leaning like a forgotten intention. He cut clean paths from the dock to the yard, stacking snow into careful walls. Bishop joined him without comment, scooping big, throwing far. Their breath plumed like small, determined trains. "You always start the morning with work?" Bishop asked. "Work keeps a ghost polite," Thomas said. Bishop laughed out loud. "You keep making sentences I want to keep in my pocket." Back inside, mugs warmed hands, plans formed. The engines would cough and bellow. The road would be ugly but passable. The youngest rider, his shaking long gone, fastened his helmet with steady fingers. Ren zipped her jacket and checked the room one last time, leaving it cleaner than they'd found it. Bishop clapped Thomas's shoulder. "We're in your debt," he said. Thomas started to protest, but Bishop lifted the palm. "Don't argue with a man who carries 14 IOUs on his vest already." Ranger leaned into Bishop's leg, accepting him into the temporary pack. "We'll get out quiet," Bishop promised. They rolled the bikes out, one after another, the engines writing their names in sound. The warehouse, now empty of thunder, seemed to widen with the silence. Bishop swung into the saddle and hesitated. "You got a place to be when the sun goes down again?" he asked. Thomas looked at the sky, at the day beginning to blush with color. "Same place," he said. "Different weather," Bishop nodded, expression darkening with a plan not yet spoken. "Keep the fire small," he said. "We prefer arriving to rescuing." He tapped 2 fingers to his brow and pulled into the pale morning. Snow hissed off the tires like secrets told too close. The last rider waved, and the door sighed shut against the cold. For a while, Thomas stood with his hand on the metal, listening to the sound of distance do its work. Then he cleaned their corner, folded the pallet wrap, banked the fire to coals, and split the final crust of bread with Ranger. "We did okay, buddy," he said, scratching beneath the dog's collar. Ranger thumped agreement. Thomas lay back against the wall and let his bones remember warm. Sunlight found a seam in the boards and rolled a stripe. He must have slept 20 minutes or 2 hours. Time is funny after storms. When he woke, the quiet had a different weight. Ranger had already lifted his head. Far away at first, then nearer, came the unmistakable tide of engines. Not 10, not 15, many. Thomas stood and brushed snow dust from his sleeves. An odd laugh caught in his throat. "Well," he told Ranger, "sounds like somebody sent invitations." The sound rolled closer, filling the yard, doubling back on itself, surrounding the warehouse with thunder. Ranger's tail swept the floor, undecided between nerves and joy. Thomas eased the door open. The yard was black with bikes, chrome catching the new light, banners flaring red and white against clean snow. Dozens, no more than that, lined the street and curled around the block, exhaust drawing cold into heat. At the front stood Bishop, visor up, eyes bright with decision. He removed his gloves with ceremony and climbed the dock steps. The men behind him fell silent, like a congregation waiting for a hymn to begin. Thomas glanced at Ranger, felt the dog lean against his shin, and stepped forward to meet whatever the morning had brought. Bishop stopped an arm's length away, boots wet, beard glittering with thaw. "Thomas," he said, using the name like a handshake. "Last night you treated strangers like family. We don't forget that." He gestured to the ocean of riders. "This is our thank you." Thomas opened his mouth and found no words willing to be first. Bishop's grin flashed. "Relax. We ain't here to scare the neighbors. We're here to change your weather." He turned, raised a hand, and the crowd answered with quiet, disciplined motion, kickstands lifting, helmets unstrapping, parcels being passed forward like offerings. Ranger barked once, astonished and pleased. Packages found Thomas's arms, blankets still in plastic, a box of canned soup, a stove with a little blue flame, boots in his size, a coat lined like memory. Someone set down a generator and a jerry can. Someone else rolled in a cot. Ren presented the toolkit, the wrenches gleaming like a promise. The youngest rider placed the thermos in Thomas's hands and said, serious as the minister, hot, always. Thomas tried, failed, tried again to thank them. Words kept fogging and disappearing. Bishop finally saved him. "We'll be back," he said. "You gave us a home in the storm. Let us return it." Thomas swallowed, then found a sentence that belonged. "Coffee's on," he said, voice steadier than any engine. Bishop laughed. "Good. We write better with reasons." He reached down to scratch Ranger's ears. "You guard him, soldier," he told the dog. Ranger closed his eyes like a king receiving tribute. The engine stayed quiet while men shook hands, clapped shoulders, and pretended not to notice tears cooling too fast on wind-burned cheeks. When the bikes finally fired, it was less a roar than a vow. Thomas stood in the doorway, a man newly surrounded by weather he had not dared to expect. He didn't step back inside until the last taillight blurred into distance and the snow reclaimed the lane. The warehouse looked different now, as if gratitude had changed the geometry. Thomas stacked gifts carefully, resisting the urge to hide them like contraband. Ranger trotted beside him, nails clicking, tail flagging a new rhythm. Thomas set the cot under the cleanest window and unfolded the blanket. He placed the stove where drafts couldn't bully it and filled the thermos with gratitude he couldn't name. "We'll tell this story slow," he told Ranger. "It deserves the long version." Ranger agreed with a sigh. Outside, the day brightened toward a pale blue, the city safe for days after storms. The wind had calmed. Somewhere far off, a siren practiced indifference. Thomas brewed tea on his brand new stove and watched the steam make delicate ghosts in the colder air. He held the cup for a beat before drinking, letting the heat claim his fingers first. "Some storms end," he said, surprised by the truth of it. Ranger laid his head on Thomas's boot and closed one eye lazily. In the distance, too soft to be sound, something like hope kept time with their breathing. Morning arrived as pale light spilled through cracks in the warehouse boards. The storm had loosened its grip, but the world outside was blanketed in heavy silence. Thomas rubbed his stiff hands together and whistled softly to Ranger, who stretched before settling again at his feet. The riders packed their things, preparing to leave. Bishop clapped Thomas on the back. "We'll never forget last night," he said. Thomas nodded politely, expecting nothing more. He had offered them shelter, fire, and tea. That was enough. By midday, the sound of their engines had vanished, swallowed by snow and distance. For hours after they left, Thomas wandered the empty warehouse. It felt bigger now, lonelier. Ranger padded behind him, nails clicking against concrete. He tried not to think about the warmth of conversation, the rare laughter, the way strangers had made him feel like part of something for one night. Instead, he busied himself with chores, stacking what little wood he had left, folding his threadbare blanket, adjusting the broken boards to block the wind. Life returned to its usual rhythm, quiet, simple, anonymous. By evening, he told himself it had been nothing but a brief interruption in survival. Yet even as Thomas worked, he couldn't shake the echo of engines. The sound replayed in his head like a stubborn hymn, refusing to fade. He thought of Bishop's smile, of Ren's quick jokes, of the youngest rider finally warming with tea in his hands. Ranger tilted his head whenever Thomas grew still, sensing his unease. "They're gone, boy," Thomas muttered. "We'll be fine." Ranger wagged his tail once, but his eyes stayed fixed on the door as if expecting company. Outside, the snow glittered under moonlight, untouched by tracks, as though the night before had been only a dream. The following morning dawned brighter. Sunlight scattered diamonds across the snow, dazzling against the warehouse's gray walls. Thomas brewed weak tea on the little fire and shared a crust of bread with Ranger. Just as he took his first sip, a low rumble trembled through the floor. At first he thought it was memory again, playing tricks. But Ranger sprang up, ears sharp, growling softly. The rumble grew louder, multiplying until the air vibrated. Thomas walked to the broken door and pulled it open. His breath caught. The street outside was filled, wall to wall, with the thunder of engines. It was not 15 bikes this time, but closer to 100. Chrome gleamed, leather jackets blazed with red and white patches, and the morning air filled with disciplined chaos. They lined both sides of the street, engines revving like a heartbeat too big for the city to contain. At the front, Bishop raised his hand, and the noise dimmed into an eerie, respectful quiet. Thomas stood frozen, Ranger pressed against his leg. Bishop dismounted, boots crunching in the snow, and strode toward the warehouse with a grin that could split storms. "Told you we don't forget," he said simply. Behind Bishop, riders unloaded bundles, crates of canned food, warm blankets, propane tanks, and even a small generator. Ren approached with a bag of tools slung over her shoulder. "Every palace deserves maintenance," she quipped, setting them down by Thomas's feet. Another rider carried a box of books, saying, "Stories help when nights get long." Thomas stared, unable to move, his throat dry. He had offered scraps of warmth, and now an army had arrived bearing gifts he couldn't have imagined. Ranger barked once, tail sweeping furiously, as if he already knew they had just rewritten his master's winter. Thomas tried to protest, lifting his hands. "I can't, this is too much." Bishop shook his head firmly. "Too much is what we're good at. You gave us shelter when nobody else would. Now we return it." One by one, the riders set down their offerings. A portable stove, sleeping bags, even dog food packed in neat cans. "For the soldier," someone said, patting Ranger's head. The dog leaned into the touch, tail wagging. Thomas swallowed hard, overwhelmed. He had spent years invisible, a shadow on society's edge. Yet here he stood, the focus of a loyalty he hadn't dared hope for. As more supplies piled up, Thomas felt his knees weaken. He sank onto a crate, rubbing his face with both hands. "Why me?" he whispered. Bishop crouched to meet his eyes. "Because you were there when we needed you. Because kindness given the cold means more than gold," Ren added softly. "Because even outlaws know when a man deserves respect." The words carved deep, warming places Thomas thought had frozen years ago. He looked at Ranger, who barked as if agreeing. For once, Thomas didn't argue. He simply nodded, tears blurring the sight of chrome and leather. The riders stayed for hours, helping organize the warehouse. They built shelves from scrap wood, lined supplies neatly, even patched holes in the roof. Some swept the floor while others shoveled paths outside. The cavernous space slowly transformed into something livable, a refuge rather than a ruin. Thomas joined in, his hands steady despite trembling with disbelief. "Feels like a clubhouse," one rider joked. Bishop chuckled. "Feels like family." Thomas glanced around. He had never used that word for this place before. But as warmth filled the once cold walls, he realized it finally fit. For the first time, he wasn't alone. By late afternoon, the work was done. Engines cooled outside while laughter echoed in the rafters. Thomas brewed tea again, this time strong and plentiful, poured into mismatched mugs they had brought. The riders toasted to him, to Ranger, to the night that had brought them together. "To shelter," Bishop declared. "To strangers," Ren added. "To brothers," the youngest rider finished. Thomas raised his cup, voice steady now. "To storms that pass." The cheer that followed shook the walls. Ranger barked, tail wagging furiously, as if he too wanted the toast recorded in memory. It was a communion he would never forget. As evening neared, Bishop called everyone outside. The riders gathered, engines idling low, the sky burning orange over snowbanks. Bishop turned to Thomas. We'll ride out now, but this isn't goodbye. This is the start of something bigger. Thomas frowned. What do you mean? Bishop gestured toward the rows of bikes. From now on, you're one of us. You ever need anything, you call. You'll never face winter alone again. The words ran like a vow, echoing through the cold. Thomas felt Ranger lean against him, steady and sure. For the first time in years, he believed in tomorrow. The engines roared to life, a thunderous chorus carrying promise into the twilight. Riders raised gloved hands as they pulled away, disappearing in lines down the snowy road. Bishop lingered last, his grin sharp and warm. Keep the fire small, he reminded Thomas. We'll keep coming back. With that, he mounted his bike and roared off, leaving the yard vibrating in silence. Thomas stood at the doorway, Ranger pressed to his side, watching until the last taillight vanished. Then he looked at the warehouse filled with supplies and breathed deeply. For once, survival wasn't the only thing waiting for him. That night, Thomas lay on a real sleeping bag, Ranger curled against his chest. The warehouse glowed softly with the hum of the generator and the smell of warm stew simmering on the stove. He stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His life had changed in less than 2 days. Not because he had begged or demanded, but because he had chosen to share what little he had. Ranger shifted, snuffling contentedly. Thomas stroked his fur and whispered, We did it, boy. We finally found the pack. Outside, the snow fell gently, but inside, Thomas felt only warmth. Weeks passed, and the riders kept their promise. Sometimes 2 or 3 would stop by, dropping off supplies or just sharing stories. Sometimes a dozen came, turning the warehouse into a gathering hall filled with laughter and music. Thomas found himself smiling more, listening with ease, speaking with confidence he thought he lost forever. Ranger became the group's mascot, loved and spoiled by all. Bishop often said, Every brother needs a guardian angel. Looks like you already had one. Thomas agreed silently. He had thought himself forgotten, but now he was part of something larger. His story had begun again. One spring afternoon, Bishop brought him a gift. An old motorcycle, battered but salvageable. Thought you might like a project, he said. Thomas stared, speechless, until Ranger barked and nudged him forward. His hands traced the handlebars with reverence. Memories stirred roads once traveled, freedom once tasted. Bishop clapped his shoulder. You don't ride alone anymore. The bike became a symbol, not just of past lives, but of new beginnings. Every time Thomas worked on it, he felt the storm's echo reminding him. One night of kindness had changed everything. The warehouse was no longer a shelter, it was home. Years later, when people spoke of the Hells Angels, they whispered legends of wild rides and fierce loyalty. But among the riders themselves, another story always came first. The night a homeless man named Thomas and his loyal dog shared a fire in a broken warehouse. That story was retold by campfires, at bars, and on endless highways, each version slightly different but always true at its core. It wasn't about charity, it was about brotherhood, born in the snow. And for Thomas, every time he heard it, he smiled quietly, knowing storms could break a man, but kindness could rebuild him. Even now, when snow returned and winds howled across the city, Thomas no longer feared. He had fire, food, family, Ranger, older but still faithful, slept at his feet. And outside, the faint rumble of engines often reminded him he was never truly alone. He looked at the bike Bishop had given him, shining under a new coat of paint, and whispered, We're still riding, brother. Ranger's ears twitched, tail thumping gently. The storm had changed everything, but what mattered most wasn't the snow. It was the choice to share warmth, a choice that turned a homeless man into a legend.